The Church of Christ presents Let the Bible Speak with your speaker, Brett Hickey.
The book of 1 Samuel provides a lengthy list of leadership do's and don'ts through the lives of men like Eli the high priest, Samuel the prophet and Israel's last judge, King Saul, and King David. In this book, we get an idea of the kind of leaders the Lord looks for. God clearly looks for humility in the leaders of His people. He found this quality in the young man Saul. Saul, the son of Kish, was tall, dark, and handsome, 1 Samuel 9, verse 1 and 2. He was literally heads and shoulders above all the people. I imagine Saul had a muscular build and was pushing about 7 feet tall. Saul had a pedigree. His father Kish was a mighty man of power. Yet, despite all of these attributes, Saul demonstrates humility early on when Samuel shows great interest in him and hints at a special place for Saul. Saul says in response to Samuel's special consideration in 1 Samuel 9:21, "Am I not a Benjamite, of the smallest of the tribes of Israel, and my family the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin? Why then do you speak like this to me?" Then when the selection of Saul became known, he could not be found because he was hiding. 1 Samuel 10:21 and 22. Unfortunately, power corrupts, and it obviously ruined Saul. Saul's prideful blunders, including the ultimate selfie, building a monument to himself, led both God and Samuel to despise Saul. On one occasion, Saul lacked the discipline, courage, and respect for God's appointments to wait for Saul's return to sacrifice. Instead, Saul usurped Samuel's prerogative to offer the sacrifice and execute that sacred responsibility himself. Then not only did he fail to slaughter all the Amalekites and all their livestock as God commanded, but he spared King Agag and the best of the flocks, and then had the nerve to lie to God about it. Pride on steroids. Notice the response. The Lord said in 1 Samuel 15:11, "I greatly regret that I have set up Saul as king, for he has turned back from following me and has not performed my commandments." And it grieved Samuel, and he cried out to the Lord all night. 1 Samuel 15:17, "So Samuel said, 'When you were little in your own eyes, were you not head of the tribes of Israel? And did not the Lord anoint you king over Israel?' Verse 28, "So Samuel said to him, 'The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you.'" Going to church has changed in the past century. We are blessed by air-conditioned buildings, padded pews, heated baptistries, and indoor plumbing. Along the way, amidst positive progress, though, some valued qualities have been lost, seemingly in an appeal to the flesh and not the spirit. Is the move from old-time religion to showtime religion really progress? What about the simplicity of New Testament Christianity? What about an assembly where the only celebrity is Jesus? What about an assembly where the worship emphasis is as Jesus taught, in spirit and in truth? We invite you to visit congregations where you're not just a face in the crowd, but where you are with real people, where the words brother and sister mean genuine relationships. Come home. We believe this is where God wants you. In the newfound way of the gospel, I may lead to the home eternal. I walk and talk with the Master every day. When the storms may tide, He safely guides me while the slow supernal. I walk and talk in the New Jerusalem way. I walk and talk in the New Jerusalem way as the rest of God recognized in a young shepherd, probably in his late teens, a depth of the leadership traits that Saul lacked. He was courageous, devoted, industrious, and loyal. He was a great poet and musician while also having the qualities of a great warrior. Despite David's great abilities, he wasn't arrogant. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. If God gave him garbage duty, David would give it the same gusto as if he was governing the nation. He treated lowly labor like a lofty assignment. I'm talking about David as a shepherd. No glory, no honor, no audience but God. And David acted like he knew it. I love the selection process the Lord put Samuel through. God came to Samuel and said, "When are you going to stop wailing, whining, and whimpering over Saul? I'm through with him. Fill your horn with oil and go to the home of Jesse in Bethlehem. I've chosen a king among Jesse's 8 sons." When Eliab, the oldest, stepped up and before Samuel, Jesse was beaming with pride over his firstborn. You know how special the number one son is. Incidentally, I'm the oldest son in our family. Jesse thought, "My firstborn son will make a great king." Samuel looked Eliab over and was on the same page, and so blurted out, "Surely the Lord's anointed is before him." No, wrong. God has an important message for Samuel and for us today as well in 1 Samuel 16:7. But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." God sees beyond the brawny build and looks straight to the soul. God seeks a kind, committed, compliant, and courageous heart. He doesn't see this in Eliab. Jesse presents son number 2, Abinadab. Next. What about number 3, Shammua? Nope. One by one, God eliminates sons number 1 through 7. This must have been exasperating for Jesse, who didn't even bring David in for the lineup. After God issues his 7 no's, Samuel looks around and asks if Jesse has any more sons. Jesse has to go fetch the other from among the sheep, where Jesse keeps sending David. 1 Samuel 16:12, so he sent and brought him in. Now David was ruddy, with bright eyes and good looking. And the Lord said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is the one." Now, this was a big deal, but there is no record of a family celebration. No chanting, "David, David." David plays somewhat of a Joseph role in this family. That's obvious in 1 Samuel 17, verse 28. This honor didn't seem to impress Jesse much either. For a short time later, we see him put David back with the sheep, while his 3 older brothers are with King Saul and the army of Israel, poised to fight the Philistines. As Alexander McLaren puts it, the armies of Israel and the Philistines were looking at each other across the valley with occasional skirmishes. I think of a boxing match where the pugilists leading up to the fight are shown growling and snarling at each other, staring and glaring and spouting venom at each other. You would think by the intensity before the fight that they would be pummeling each other from the opening bell. But lo and behold, when they get in the ring, sometimes they just dance and prance around with only an occasional punch. That's how this Israeli-Palestinian battle sounds. Philistine battle sounds. Tensions high, actions low. The historical highlights for about a 6-week span are the twice daily insults of God's people and challenges from Goliath, the giant from Gath. If Saul was head and shoulders above the people, Goliath was hips and shoulders above the people. Head and shoulders above even Saul at a bulky 9 feet tall. This bully blaspheme with bluster. We can be thankful that we get the rated G version in the Scriptures. Goliath defied the armies of Israel and dared Saul to send the mightiest warrior, the toughest hombre, the machoest man that Israel has to fight against him. Whoever wins that individual skirmish earns victory for his people over their enemy as well. So how did the mighty armies of Israel respond? Is there a long line of soldiers standing before Saul, pleading for the opportunity to be the one chosen to fight for God's honor? No. 1 Samuel 17:11. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Enter David. He had previously played the harp for King Saul as a skillful musician, and as we know from the book of Psalms, he was a great poet and hymn writer. One of Saul's servants also described David as a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and most importantly, the Lord is with him. But the dutiful son had some time back returned to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. David's dad, Jesse, curious about the battle though, eventually makes David a delivery boy, sending him off running to his 3 older brothers with bread and cheese for them and for their captains. Son, Jesse says, bring back a full report. When David arrived at camp, he had a servant stay with the food while he ran to meet the army that was preparing for battle. He arrived in time to see Goliath issue his morning challenge. Israel's army retreated in fear, like the ripple caused by a big bass exploding into the air in a calm lake. The Bible says they fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. The soldiers near David asked, "Did you see him? You know, whoever kills him will receive great riches and the king's daughter in marriage." David responds with great indignation, apparently more fixated on the gall of Goliath than on the bounty for beheading him. For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Eliab, David's oldest brother, likely still smarting over Samuel passing over him to anoint this brother, 10 years his junior. The next king pops his cork, Eliab does, in 1 Samuel 17:28. "Why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." Can you imagine if Samuel had made this man king? What a mess. David has neither said nor done anything wrong, and yet his oldest brother lights into him. Reckon Eliab's irritation spikes over guilt or shame over his own cowardice and inaction? Listen to David's response to the spiteful rebuke. Why did he come? He was obeying his father and bringing you food. Few sheep. Eliab suggests David has had a worthless assignment in the middle of nowhere with a few senseless animals. David had been a good steward of that seemingly insignificant assignment. He cared for those sheep as if they'd been his own children. Eliab slanders David. "I know your heart." Really? Big brother is now reading hearts. Eliab says, "You have a proud, insolent heart, and I can prove it because you've come to see the battle." Gotta be kidding. Any 18-year-old would want to check out the battlefront if they had the opportunity. Listen, don't let the scorners and the hecklers bring you down. David's zeal for the Lord's name and his honor was twisted and perverted into evil. And listen, people will find a way to malign your good works and your good words. Men posing as the leaders of God's people were so spiritually bankrupt that they attributed the miracles of Jesus to the power of Beelzebub. Don't let abusive, malevolent, cranky people, even Christians sometimes, get you down. Incidentally, the Lord looks for leaders who are lovers of good men, Titus 1, verse 8. Now, I love David's response, 1 Samuel 17:29. Is there not a cause? What on earth are we on earth for, fellas? We're here to glorify God, to defend His honor. In 2017, this means saving ourselves, saving those in sin, living godly lives, loving the brethren, loving our enemies, and promoting the truth. Some things matter, some things just don't. David knew the difference, and so must we. Pause. Think. What matters most to you in this life? Of course, after this display, they rushed David to King Saul. David says, I will go. When the Lord needs you for needs, big and small, do you respond like David, I will go, or do you say no? King Saul wanted a hero, but he expected different packaging and so underestimated David. You're too young. You're inexperienced. Listen, for the majority of responsibilities assigned to Christians, you are not too young. You're old enough to be committed. If you were a Christian, you're old enough to be dependable. Everybody but David was seeing how little they could contribute. What a tragedy when Christians take on that attitude. David prepared for this great battle in his daily life when no one but God was watching, when no one was cheering, when he could have gotten away with doing less. We read in 1 Samuel 17, verse 34, But David said to Saul, Your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard, and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. David said, You mess with my sheep, you die. You think I'll let you blaspheme my God? We all have Goliaths in our lives. My Goliath looks different than some of yours, and some of yours look different than mine. But if God lets a Goliath invade your life, He will equip you with the tools and the strength to defeat it. What's your Goliath? Time management, financial management, organization and order, unemployment and career decisions, depression, worry, fear, intimidation, illness, relationships, family issues, porn, alcohol. Whatever your giant is, you can handle it with God's help. How do you view the Goliaths that come along in your life? Maybe we need to rethink how we see the Goliaths in our lives. A Facebook friend from Kentucky wrote essentially the following: Was Goliath from Gath a good thing? Without Goliath, there would be no David, not at least as we know him today. So whatever despair or dark looming situation you may be facing, stare it in the face, accept the reality, and attack it with prayer and all your might. Let your Goliath be a stepping stone. Don't you agree? God is bigger than any difficulty the devil, any difficulty the world can throw at you. Take David's approach. 1 Samuel 17:37. The Lord delivered me before, and He will deliver me from this Goliath. David's persuasive mini-sermon convinced King Saul. He said, Go, and the Lord be with you. There were a number of ways David could have handled this. Number one, he could have ran home crying, slinging stones at his sheep. Never helps to kick the dog when you have a bad day. Number two, he could have slung stones at Eliab. That might have been gratifying momentarily, but would have brought long-term regret and shame. Number three, he could have returned cursing for Goliath's cursing before running away like Israel's army. But while Israel's soldiers protest, he's too big, David thought, look at that big noggin. What an easy target. Number four, he could have heeded those who pointed out his deficiencies. We all have shortcomings. But David knew, and we should know, that God can use us despite our inadequacies. 1 Samuel 17:47, Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and He will give you into our hands. Listen, turn it over to Him, to God, and let God use you as He sees fit for the victory. I love this. There was no stalling, no sneaking around. 1 Samuel 17:48, so it was, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Don't just hang around thinking. When you know, go. Don't just twirl that sling around endlessly in a holding pattern. I think I can. No, let her rip. When you know, go, and you will get Big Mo. Look at how David's action turned an army of nail-biting thumb twiddlers into competent charging conquerors. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, beginning with verse 49, then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword, and drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Now the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted, and pursued the Philistines. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Shaaraim, even as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines and plundered their tents. When you know, go, and you gain momentum for your family and the kingdom of God. Do you know what changes you need to make in your life to honor God? Do you need to obey the gospel? Do you need to move to a congregation that worships God in spirit and truth? Don't hesitate. Don't delay. Lead your family and friends by example into the paths of righteousness. Contact us, and we'll be glad to help. The scriptures say in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 15, Today, if you will hear His voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. If you know what's right and you know what you need to do, you need to act and act today. We do not know if we'll have tomorrow. Please send us any comments or questions you may have about today's message or any related question about the Bible or the Church of the Bible. Tune in every Lord's Day and join us for worship at one of the congregations that will be listed shortly. You can call or write for a transcript, CD, or DVD of number 1102, On a Sling and a Prayer. As the Apostle Paul wrote in Romans chapter 16, verse 16, the churches of Christ salute you. Until next week, goodbye and God bless.